everyone. Welcome back to the How to Podcast series. You know, sometimes you get to talk to great people more than once, which is great. Debbie and I recorded an episode together, and then for some reason, Zoom didn't like us and didn't work out. So we're back, and I'm with a fellow Canadian podcaster that I met in the UK in a meetup group. Like, what are the odds of that? And Debbie and I were there classing up the joint as two Canadians with a bunch of UK podcasters. And we were there causing a ruckus. And now we're best friends here in podcast land. Debbie, welcome to the How to Podcast series. Glad to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me again, Dave. And it's just great to see your face and talk to you again. And yeah, it was awesome the first time we met too in that meetup group from the UK. And we were the two lone Canadians, but that's how that's when we first communicated with each other. It's been really good for me. Yeah, it's
great. Yeah, I didn't even know anyone in that room when I first came in, and then we got talking, and it was really, really kind of cool to make a connection in the UK with a fellow Canadian. It's pretty unique. So I like that.
It was meant to be, I think.
There you go. I love it. Tell everybody where you are in Canada.
Yeah, I live in a little town called Rosetown, like the flower, Rosetown in Saskatchewan. And it is getting cooler here these days. We have some snow on the ground even.
There you go. Well, you can keep it. We just have leaves on the ground. And yeah, I have this great theory of how I take care of my leaves. I let them blow into my neighbor's yard, and then he rakes them up. So it gives him something to do, and I'm just helping him with his health regimen. So that's what I do.
Wow, it's a win-win for both of you then.
Works really well. My wife is not impressed, but hey, you do what you can do. So you have to have time for podcasting. I can't go rake leaves. I got to talk to Debbie. So, yeah, this is great. Talk about your podcast too, Debbie. Tell everybody about your show.
Okay. My podcast is called Older and Bolder with Debbie McCulloch. And I interview women who are fearless, fabulous, and 50 plus.
There you go.
And it's been a really fulfilling project of mine. My guests have been amazing. It was, I am new to podcasting. My first episode was released in March.
Wow.
And I'm a retired pharmacist. So my previous life, this is out of my comfort zone, but I have really enjoyed it. I've learned so much. And yeah, Older and Bolder, I chose that because I am older. I'm in my 60s. And I just feel very passionately that any time we get to live past age 50 is indeed a gift and needs to be appreciated.
Nice. And so how many episodes do you have right now at the time of our recording here?
I have 27 that have been released and a couple more that I've recorded that haven't been released yet. And it's usually once a week, every Tuesday. Mm-hmm.
Good. Nice. It's amazing. Tell me a little bit about some of your guests.
Well, my guests have really varied. I have lots that have gone through incredible adversity in their life and have found their path forward. For instance, one of my guests had her son, his wife, and all three of their children killed instantly in a traffic accident.
Wow.
And that those were her only three grandchildren. And since that time, she's played a big role in a foundation that has really promoted play and family time in communities. And the funds have been used to create splash parks and pump tracks and playgrounds. And it's amazing, like just unfathomable loss. And others have really just pursued their passions a lot. One of my guests was 93 years old. And when she was in her 70s, her and her friend, after she had become a widow, decided to write a musical play and just for their small community. But it was so successful. And this was all with just amateur actors and musicians. it was performed more than 100 times and even ended up selling out a 2,000 seat venue in Saskatoon several times. So they really vary. I've had so many of them. I could go on and on and on, but I know we don't have time for that. But I do feel passionately about that this stage of life, we can still really pursue passions, we can make a difference, and we can overcome adversity in a big way.
Now, I know you and I have talked in the past, and now about how important it is to know your why around your podcast. And your why is very unique. It's special. There's stories behind your why as to why you have this podcast. Can you talk a little bit about your why?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Dave. My why is that when I was growing up, I thought I knew my life was really good. I had a great family life growing up, and I never ever thought that something bad was going to happen to us. And then all of a sudden it does. So I've had many losses. When I was a young mother, my father passed away from cancer at age 57. And then within less than 2 years, my youngest sister, Cindy, who was only 24 years old, was viciously murdered in her own home. And that was just incredibly overwhelming for our whole family. And also we went through some trials after many, many months of not knowing what happened to her. No one has ever been held accountable for her murder. And that happened back in 1986. And then following that, my sister, a year older than me, was diagnosed with MS. Our mother died in her 60s. My sister ended up passing away at age 53 with a diagnosis of breast cancer. So I was really always feeling that having your health and living past a certain age is definitely a gift that needs to be appreciated and celebrated. And then, so after I retired, after 40 years as a pharmacist, I was thinking about this project, and then my husband became ill. He ultimately passed away at age 67, just a little over a year ago. And that really propelled me to be even more passionate about doing this podcast and spreading the word and I'm always moved by stories. So sharing other stories about what they're doing in this last chapter of their life was something I really, really wanted to do as a retirement project. So that's why I started it.
What a powerful why. That is, first of all, the loss is outstanding. Like, that's just numbing to have that much loss in your life. But I love how you've taken something that was bad and turned it into something good by shedding a light on others and sharing their stories. That's the whole idea around legacy is really important to me, in capturing these stories and having them. For my podcast, I've had 2 gentlemen on my show in the past that are no longer with us anymore. Mm-hmm. And they've passed away now. And I have this video of us talking. I have all their audio, and I've been able to give that back to the family. So they have their dad and their father and their grandfather, and they have him on camera so they can watch and listen to him again. And so I never anticipated that as a host, that would be one of the gifts I could give back to families, is having this footage of these people. They're great people, right? So
what a gift to their families. That would just be really, really touching for them.
Yeah, and as a stranger, not knowing them the way they know them, I'm asking them questions and bringing things out of them that they, as a family member, they may never have thought to ask. Mm-hmm. So they get to hear a little different side of their family member, and it's something unique for them to have. So you just never know as a podcaster, kind of the impact you're going to have beyond your podcast. And I know I was doing my 10-episode series on the Appleseed series, and you were connecting with that, which brings me a lot of joy, because I was really felt compelled that was a message we needed right now. Just the fact, again, if you haven't heard that series and you're listening right now, just the fact that you can count the number of seeds in an apple, but you can't count the number of apples in a seed, in that one seed has unlimited potential to produce apples for years and years and years, and you can't count that potential. So in our podcast world, we create content, we connect with people, but you don't know what's going to happen after you hit stop on your recording and you put it live. Who's going to hear it? Whose life is going to be different? So I love how your podcast is all built around these stories. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And I love, like, that saying really resonated with me, the apple seed. And I did even use it in a blog post where I spoke about a couple of my guests. And that just really, really comes to fruition when I get feedback from some of the listeners that have been impacted by my guests and their stories, whether it's someone that has a family member struggling with Parkinson's. And one of my guests really shared intimately about the struggles with her husband, who was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's, or others that have said, I feel like I could still go back to school and get a degree that I always wanted in my 50s, because one of my guests went back to university and became a registered nurse in her mid 50s. And just so many of them where people really, it resonated with them, the stories of my guests. And I'm just so grateful for all my guests and for my listeners as well, because that was what I was hoping for, because I'm always moved by people's stories. And I've had guests with incredibly uplifting stories.
So I'm curious, how did you land on starting a podcast? Were you a podcast listener before and you kind of worked your way into this? How did that happen?
Yeah, I was a podcast listener. So in Saskatchewan, we have to travel long distances to get many places. So I started listening to podcasts in my vehicle mostly. And to start with, some of the first ones I listened to were really to help me learn Spanish. I'm learning Spanish in my older years. It was something that I just really wanted to do. So I'd listen to some of those. Then I would start looking into other podcasts, and I started listening to a lot of lifestyle ones and just motivational ones and interview shows. And it just grew and grew. I love listening to podcasts. And that's kind of how it started. I've always liked writing as well. And I have done a fair amount of public speaking, mostly through my career as a pharmacist. I was very involved in the provincial and national levels with in the pharmacy world, and doing different public speaking, whether it was to other professionals or to the public. So I just thought podcasting might be a good fit. Although I'm not very techy, that part of it I wasn't too sure about, but I have found an editor and producer that does that part of it for me. So
Nice. So how are you different as a person now that you're a podcaster compared to before?
I think it's made me more confident to try new things. Good. And again, my amazing editor and producer, she is a woman that had a previous career too and has her business. She was in broadcasting a lot, but she's so encouraging and she coaches me. And she kept telling me, Debbie, you are a podcaster, because I would say things like, I want to try podcasting, or maybe I can do this. And she's been so encouraging, but others have as well. So I think it's really increased my confidence. And I do find so much joy in it, meeting so many people and meeting people like you too, Dave, whether it be a fellow podcaster and my guests. I love learning about my guests. I love speaking to them. I love them opening up, and the feedback from the listeners. So it allows me flexibility. I'm retired, so the reason I retired from my pharmacy job was I wanted more time to do other things.
Good.
And I have 2 grandsons that I love to spend time with, and other family members and friends and volunteering and other things. And this seemed to be a good fit.
How did you get connected with that meetup group where we met together? I'm just curious how that happened for you.
Google.
Really? Oh, good.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really quite random. I was just Googling podcast groups because I felt there's no other podcasters that I'm aware of in my little town. And I really thought, I know I can learn so much more. So I guess it was meant to be. It was such a coincidence. And then I met you, and then I started listening to your podcast, the podcast series, especially, where I have learned a lot from you and others. And I did love that meetup group. And so, yeah, we can continue to learn from each other. And I love that. But it was just random. How did you find it, Dave?
Same thing, I think. I'm on Meetup. I host my own meetups as well around my podcast. And I think I was just on Google, and I just did the same thing you did. Just looking, for me, like, I'm in a big city in St. Catharines. It's huge. And I'm the only podcaster that I know of in my city. And there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people here. And it's weird. Like, I feel really lonely that there's no one here that I can just go grab a coffee with at Timmy's and talk podcasting, because there's no one here. So I'm like, well, I'm going to have to go virtual and meet people like this and then connect that way. So, and I'm kind of pushing myself, especially going into next year as well, is putting myself in places where I don't know anyone and no one knows who I am. Because then I'm going to make new connections, because I'm finding if I stay in my own little group and I know them and they know me, I'm not growing as much, right? And you get comfortable in your little group. But the moment you step out is when you make new friends, new connections, and had I not gone, had you not gone, well, we might not be talking right now. So, I want to put myself in places where I'm going to meet great people. So that was my motive behind going.
That's awesome. And that reminds me of one of your episodes where you did talk about that. You can promote on your own social media, but you're already promoting yourself to the people that already listen to you or follow you. It's good to step out of that comfort zone. I remember that words of wisdom that you shared on your podcast. And that is so true. But it's just to think of it like that. It doesn't always knock us over the head that's what we could or should be doing. And it really expands our horizons and makes it all the more interesting.
There's something new that I'm working on right now here in Canada. They're having the Canadian Podcast Awards. It's a Canadian only for Canadian podcasters, and you can register your podcast with them. And they do an award show once a year in November, I believe. And actually, one of my 7 podcasts was nominated for an award. I don't know if I've won, but it's my Daily Santa podcast for kids has been nominated.
Oh, congratulations, Dave. That was exciting.
Really exciting. So I have to pre-film my acceptance, even if I don't win. I still have to film it and make a video and send it off. So I have to do that this week. But I think it's November 13th is when the cutoff is, and people can vote for my podcast. But I'm excited to do that because I'm meeting other Canadian podcasters. And I'm really on this focus right now to connect with Canadian podcasters. We need more Canadian podcasters. I just think it's something that's missing is some kind of community around that. So maybe you and I can work on that, and any other Canadian podcasters listening would love to connect and get us all together because we have one thing in common. We're all Canadians. So that'd be great.
I would love that, Dave, to be a part of that because networking just makes us all better and we can learn so much from each other. And yeah, I love that because I know there's a lot I want to learn and to keep growing. And Yeah, I would love that.
There you go. So if you're listening, you can go to the Canadian Podcast Awards. Just Google it. I'll have a link in the show notes too, but you can go there. And if you look under kids and family, I think it is, that's where the Daily Santa podcast is. So excited for that. So that's big news.
That's very exciting,
Big
Dave.
news. Yeah, I'm really excited with that. So as far as how you learned how to podcast, because you told us how you started, how did you learn how to do all this stuff?
Just basically trial and error.
Good.
So I listened to podcasts and I would just take note of what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it.
Okay.
And I've been really fortunate with some of my friends. So my first guests were people I knew, people that I had admired, and I probably had admired some of them a little from afar. I hadn't told them how much I was really inspired by them and how much I admired what they were doing. Maybe they knew it, maybe they didn't. So it was people I knew that I asked to be my first guests. And they were so gracious to say yes. And so I prepped and just was quite nervous. and when I reached out to my editor, and she was actually offering podcasting workshops.
Good.
And when I looked through the whole thing, I thought, I don't really know if I want to learn all of the editing, and I probably wouldn't be as good at it. That wouldn't be what I would enjoy as much. That isn't my forte. I knew I would love the interviewing and learning about the people and prepping for it and all that. So I asked her if that's something that she would offer, and she said yes. So she set me up with some of the technical things, how to send my audio through Google Drive and things like that, some of the technology that I needed to do. And I practiced. One of my close friends came over and I said, would you mind if I did a practice episode with you? And she was so gracious to sit. So it was really trial and error, I must say. I just kind of dove in and learned along the way. And well, one of my first episodes, one of my first interviews, I'm like, oh, she couldn't hear me. I was nervous and forgot to unmute my microphone. And then finally figured that out after about 5 minutes. But it was, I did a lot of faux pas and learned along the way. And people have been so gracious to be very patient with me.
Nice. Yeah. And that's the one thing that's the reason why I created this podcast, was I wanted people to get the information they needed to start a podcast, but also to feel encouraged that you don't have to know everything. You just need to know enough to get started. And then if you want to grow into doing editing, great. If you don't, like you're doing, you can bring somebody on board and they can take care of it for you. You don't have to worry about it. So, but I just want people to learn and get confident in podcasting. Do you, as a fellow podcaster, have any words of wisdom for somebody listening who is maybe recently retired and thinking, maybe I'll try this podcasting thing? What would the wise Debbie give to a new potential podcaster? Any words of insight or encouragement?
Well, what I would say is enjoy the process. You don't have a lot to lose. It's like, what's the worst that could happen? Some people might laugh at you, and that's happened when you're my age. That's happened lots through my life. And the thing is, but it can be so rewarding. And I would recommend they listen to your podcast. Well, this podcast about the podcast series, reach out to others, listen to lots of podcasts, and just enjoy the process, because to dive right in and figure it out, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. I bought a mic. I do my podcasts in my home in Rosetown over Zoom. My interviews are done over Zoom. I listen to some podcasts, and they'll say their whole team of experts that do a lot of the technical parts, and their producers and this and that. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I wonder what that would be like. But it doesn't have to involve that. So I would say the rewards can far outweigh the frustrations, and the flexibility of it is good too. So if anyone is thinking at all about starting a podcast, I just say go for it. Maybe phone Dave too.
There you go. Thank you. I'll give you $5 for that. There you
Yeah.
go.
And to just keep in mind whatever your message is that you want to portray in your podcast is to keep your words of wisdom in mind about the apple seed. We can count the number of seeds in an apple, but we can't count the number of apples in a seed. And you never know where it can take you. So far, I've really enjoyed it. I've been blown away by the response. I've loved every one of my guests. And then I get to meet some other great people that I would have never had that opportunity to meet.
Right. And one person was saying to me, they're like, Dave, if I start a podcast, I'm really nervous that people are going to judge me. My voice, how I do my show. They're like, I just don't want to be judged. And I simply said to them, have you ever left your house before? And they looked at me like, what? Like, have you ever driven your car anywhere? Have you ever gone to the store and bought groceries? And they're like, of course I have. I'm like, okay, so do you know that when you're driving down the road, the car behind you might be judging the way you drive? You drive too slow, you drive too fast, right? Or you're putting your groceries on the belt at the store, all the things you're buying, and the person behind you is going, oh, I can't believe they're buying that. Who would ever eat that? Right?
Exactly.
So you're being judged and you don't even know what's happening and it hasn't bothered you yet. Right? So don't worry about it. And if somebody really doesn't like your show, most likely they're just not going to listen.
Exactly.
You'll never know.
Yeah. We're not shoving it down their throats. It's an option to press play or not, or there's lots of other options out there. So I really don't think there are a lot of downsides to podcasting, and it's really enjoyable. I have really enjoyed it. And like I say, I love preparing for the episodes as well. I've learned so much about so many interesting people. And I get to ask them questions that probably a lot of their friends don't ask them.
Right. Yeah. It's exciting. So what do you have planned coming up in the future for your podcast? Anything exciting coming down the road?
I do. It's all really exciting. One of my guests I'm really excited about, and I've interviewed her already, but it hasn't been released yet. She actually had started a program that was, the media just took it by storm in the US. She was on the Oprah show. She was interviewed on Good Morning America, the Today Show, Fox and Friends, CNN. And her episode on the Oprah show was so well received that it was actually aired twice more. And her name's Genevieve Paturo, and she started a program called the Pajama Program. And her episode is coming up very soon, in a week or two. And it's called Pajama Party with Purpose. But I'm really excited for everyone to listen to her and talk about me being kind of nervous. It's like Oprah's interviewed her and now I'm interviewing her. That was mind-boggling to me. But she is a fabulous woman, just such a big heart. And I enjoyed every minute of our interview. But I have many coming up. I'm also going to interview a mother of one of the unfortunate hockey players that passed away after the Humboldt Broncos bus crash.
Wow.
And as Canadians, we all remember that, and many people around the world would as well. But her name's Bernadine Boulay, and her son donated her son's organs after the crash. And since then, there's been a nationwide movement called the Logan Boulay Effect, the name of her son, where organ donation has skyrocketed since then. And they started a program called the Green Shirt Day, which is April 7th every year since then. And it's been a phenomenal success. So I can hardly wait to speak to her. We have our date set,
Wow.
but I haven't actually recorded that interview yet. So there's lots of good things coming up, Dave, that make me very excited. I'm very fortunate to have these amazing women be willing to come on my show and share their stories.
It's amazing. Those are great guests. Wow.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like I say, I'm so fortunate, and it gives me goosebumps when I think about the inspiration these women give me and my listeners. So yeah, I've got lots of good things in the work. So that's why I get excited. It does bring me so much joy, this project. So I'm glad it kind of fell into my lap, and I went ahead with it.
Well, it's great to be able to have two conversations with you. Hopefully this one works properly. The last one was great too. Fortunately, the internet ate it, but this one's great and I'm enjoying this so much. I have a final question for you at the end. But before I go to my final question for you, Debbie, again, talk about your podcast, where we can find it, and where we can connect with you. Maybe there's a great guest out there listening and going, I have to be on Debbie's podcast. So tell us how we can do all the things.
I would love that. Okay. I do have a website, olderandbolder.ca, the words AND, olderandbolder.ca. My podcast is called Older and Bolder with Debbie McCulloch. It is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and SoundCloud. So it's pretty easily found. And I would be more than happy if anyone thinks they would like to be a guest on my podcast or wants to pass this information on to someone who inspires them. I would be more than happy for them to do that. And yeah. And I've really enjoyed our conversation, Dave. So
I love talking to you. And maybe that's a good reason to talk to you more, is we'll just have to keep doing the podcast episode over and over and over so I can have more time with you, because that makes me happy. So going back to the idea around legacy, Debbie, before we go, one of the questions I'm wrestling with myself right now, and I'm interested to hear your response to this question. What do you want people to say about you, Debbie, the moment you step out of the room? You're not there, but people who know you, family, listeners of your podcast, community members, what do you want them to say about you when you're not in the room?
Oh, what a great question, Dave. That's a hard one.
Yeah.
I guess it's that I am authentic and I really care about people. I'm inspired by their stories. I love people. And I hope by sharing their stories that it is making a difference in the lives of others.
Great answer. I like it. I was asked the same question, and my response in the moment, which I'm really still developing, but it is what I believe is, I want people to know that Dave was a collector of people.
You are.
Yeah.
I love that.
I just collect people, because having a podcast opens the door to speak to great people like yourself, but also then connecting people where I'm going to meet somebody who would be perfect for you to meet, and you would be great to meet this other person. So in the behind the scenes, I'm pulling these strings and making these connections happen. And then I get out of the way. And I just love the idea that I'm here to collect people through my podcast. So that's kind of my take on it.
And you are doing that. And your podcast where you interview authors as well, that really connects people and encourages us to read their books. And you've had some amazing guests on that podcast.
Yeah. So it's
Love
exciting. So if you're listening right now to Debbie and myself, and you're thinking, oh, it sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun, but it sounds like a lot of work. Yep, it's both of those things, but you get to meet some great people by being a host of a podcast. So Debbie and I are encouraging you, as you listen to this, that you have everything you need to start a podcast. And if you have questions and you just want some encouragement, I know Debbie would love to talk to you and just encourage you in your podcast journey. Again, we're still learning as we go, but if you just want to talk to somebody and pick our brains a little bit, ask some questions, I know Debbie would love to talk to you. But there's people out there that have your back and want to see you succeed as a podcast host. So if you're listening, we're talking to you. You can do this. And Debbie's done it. I've done it. And we want you to do it as well. So Debbie, thank you so much for a round 2. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again in another meetup room soon. And keep in touch with me. And I'm looking forward to listening to all these great new episodes coming up.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for being you, Dave, a collector of people. And and you are doing amazing things in the podcasting world. And I really look forward to hearing about that podcast award show. So good luck with that as well.
We'll see. Yeah, that'll be fun. Thanks, Debbie, so much.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Hey, it's Dave jumping on here at the end. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for listening to the How to Podcast series. Putting this out there for you. You're starting a podcast and you're like, Dave, the technology is giving me a headache. This editing thing is, I don't know, it's banana pants. I can't figure it all out. And you're thinking, if there was somebody who could help me with my podcast, I would pay them to do the editing for me. Guess what? I'm actually doing that. I have clients now, past guests who've been on the show on one of my other podcasts, on this podcast. I'm doing some podcast consulting. I'm doing podcast editing. I'm helping with people launching their podcast, getting it, all the technology stuff, all getting your podcast in all the players, helping you with your YouTube channel, your website. Oh, it just goes on and on. It goes on and on. And I would love to help you. So instead of going to Fiverr or Upwork, I've been on there. I keep trying to get on for jobs and nobody's paying attention to me. And I need attention. I would rather work with you as a listener of the show. So here's what I'm saying. Go to howtopodcast.ca, leave me a voice message, tell me what you need, and let's work out something that works for you and your budget. And if you need full service or you just need something quick like a drive-through type service, I'm there for you. I got you. And if you like what you hear on any of my 7 podcasts, I can do that for you. I can. And I'd love to work with you because you are amazing. And I'm there to help you, whatever you need. howtopodcast.ca. Reach out, let me know what I can do to help you with your podcast. Thank you for listening. Catch you on the next episode. Take care.